The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty ranch as Tom Henderson walked toward the old barn, his worn boots crunching on the gravel path. At 62, he had seen enough of life's hardships to know when something was seriously wrong. The phone call from his daughter Sarah 3 days ago still echoed in his mind, her voice trembling as she spoke words that no father ever wants to hear. Sarah had always been the light of his world. After his wife Margaret died 5 years earlier, Sarah became his anchor, visiting the ranch every weekend with her 2 young children. She would help him tend to the horses, cook meals in the old farmhouse kitchen, and fill the empty spaces with laughter that reminded him why life was still worth living. But now, at 34, Sarah lay in a hospital bed 2 hours away. Her body ravaged by a cancer so aggressive that doctors spoke in whispers about time measured in weeks, not months. The diagnosis had come like lightning striking clear sky. What started as persistent fatigue and occasional headaches had revealed itself as something far more sinister during what should have been a routine checkup. Tom stopped at the fence where his favorite mare, Bella, stood waiting for her morning treat. The old horse had been with him for 15 years, a gift from Margaret on their 20th wedding anniversary. Bella nuzzled his weathered hand as he offered her an apple, her gentle eyes seeming to understand the weight he carried. The ranch had been in the Henderson family for 3 generations. Tom's grandfather had built the original homestead with nothing but determination and calloused hands. His father had expanded it, adding the horse training facility that became their main source of income. Tom had continued the tradition, raising Sarah here among the rolling hills and endless sky that stretched toward the horizon. Every corner of this land held memories. The old oak tree where he had pushed Sarah on a tire swing until she squealed with delight. The creek where they caught fireflies on summer evenings while Margaret called them in for dinner. The barn where Sarah had taken her first steps, chasing after a barn cat that seemed to understand the importance of the moment. Now those memories felt both precious and painful. Sarah's condition was deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. The experimental treatments weren't working, and the doctors had gently suggested it might be time to consider palliative care. The phrase hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. Tom had spent his entire life solving problems with his hands. A broken fence could be mended, a sick horse could be nursed back to health, a struggling ranch could be saved through hard work and determination. But this was different. This was a problem that couldn't be fixed with sweat and stubbornness. The night before, he had sat by Sarah's bedside as she drifted in and out of consciousness. The morphine helped with the pain, but it also took away pieces of the daughter he knew. In her lucid moments, she spoke about her children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Jake. She worried about their future, about who would braid Emma's hair for school pictures and teach Jake how to throw a curveball. Her ex-husband had disappeared years ago, leaving Sarah to raise the children alone until she met David, a kind man who loved the children as his own. But David worked construction and traveled frequently for jobs. Sarah's greatest fear wasn't death itself, but leaving her children without the stability they needed. As Tom walked back toward the house, he noticed the letter he had written the night before still sitting on the kitchen table. It was addressed to his lawyer, outlining his intentions for the ranch. He had decided to sell everything and use the money to establish a trust fund for Emma and Jake. The decision had kept him awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar creaks and settling sounds of the old house. Selling the ranch would mean the end of everything his family had built. But it would also mean Sarah's children would have security, would be able to attend college, would never have to worry about basic needs being met. It seemed like the right choice, the only choice a grandfather could make. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was David, calling from the hospital. Sarah had had a difficult night, and the medical team wanted to meet with the family to discuss next steps. The drive to the hospital felt longer than usual, the familiar landscape blurring past as Tom's mind raced with questions that had no good answers. At the hospital, he found Sarah awake but weak, her hand reaching for his as he entered the room. The children were with David's sister for the weekend, spared from seeing their mother in this condition. Sarah's eyes, once bright with mischief and joy, now held a depth of sadness that broke his heart. The medical team had news, but it wasn't the kind anyone wanted to hear. The cancer had spread more aggressively than expected. The treatments that had shown initial promise were no longer viable options. Dr. Martinez, a compassionate woman who had become familiar over the past months, spoke gently about comfort care and making the most of the time they had left. But Sarah had something else on her mind. As the medical team left them alone, she gripped her father's hand with surprising strength. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but her words were clear and deliberate. She had been thinking about the ranch, about the legacy their family had built there. She knew about his plans to sell it for the children's benefit, but she had a different request. The ranch represented more than money, she told him. It represented continuity, heritage, and a connection to something larger than themselves. She wanted Emma and Jake to have that connection, to know where they came from, to understand the value of hard work and the satisfaction of caring for the land and animals. Her request was simple but profound. She wanted him to keep the ranch, to raise the children there, to give them the same childhood she had experienced. She wanted them to learn responsibility through caring for animals, to find peace in the wide open spaces, to carry on the family tradition. But Sarah's next words would haunt Tom for the rest of his life. As pain medication began to take effect and her words became more slurred, she looked directly into his eyes and made a request that challenged everything he thought he knew about love, sacrifice, and doing what was right. Tom stared at his daughter's pale face, certain he had misunderstood her whispered words. The hospital room felt smaller suddenly, the steady beeping of monitors becoming a rhythm that matched his racing heartbeat. Sarah's request hung in the air between them like something tangible and heavy. "Please, Dad," she repeated, her voice gaining strength despite her physical weakness. "Don't let me suffer through this. I've seen what comes next. I've watched other patients in this ward. I know what the final weeks look like, and I can't do that to the children. I can't let that be their last memory of me." Tom's mouth went dry. His daughter wasn't just talking about end-of-life care or hospice comfort measures. She was asking him to help her die on her own terms, while she still had enough of herself left to say goodbye properly. The request went against everything he believed about fighting until the end, about never giving up hope, about the sanctity of life. But as he looked at Sarah's face, he saw something that shattered his resolve. She wasn't asking out of despair or momentary weakness. This was a decision she had reached after careful consideration, after watching the inevitable progression of her disease in other patients, after thinking about what kind of memories she wanted to leave her children. "The kids can't see me like this is going to become," Sarah continued, her eyes filling with tears. "Emma already asks why Mommy looks so tired all the time. Jake keeps trying to make me laugh because he thinks that will make me better. How do I explain to an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old that Mommy is going to waste away, that there will be days when I don't recognize them, when I'm so drugged that I can't even speak their names?" Tom felt his world shifting beneath him. He had raised Sarah to be strong, independent, and thoughtful. Now that same strength was leading her to a conclusion that terrified him. He wanted to argue, to insist that doctors sometimes got things wrong, that miracles could happen, that giving up was never the answer. But Sarah had done her research. She had spoken extensively with Dr. Martinez about the typical progression of her particular type of cancer. She had spent hours online, reading medical journals and patient testimonials. She knew that the next phase would involve increasing pain, confusion, loss of bodily functions, and ultimately a death that could take weeks of agony. "There's a place in Oregon," Sarah said quietly. "It's legal there. Physician-assisted death for terminally ill patients who meet certain criteria. I've already spoken with David about it. He understands, even though it breaks his heart. But I need you to understand too, Dad. I need you to be okay with this choice." Tom stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where ordinary people were living ordinary days. Somewhere out there, families were arguing about dinner plans and homework assignments, completely unaware of the impossible conversation taking place in room 314. The rancher in him understood putting wounded animals out of their misery. He had made that choice dozens of times over the years, always with a heavy heart, but never with doubt that it was the compassionate thing to do. But this was his daughter, his only child, the person who carried his wife's smile and his own stubborn determination. "What about experimental treatments?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "What about clinical trials? Maybe there's something new that could help." Sarah had anticipated this question. She had already explored every option, consulted with specialists in 3 different states, and enrolled in one experimental program that had ultimately failed. The cancer was too aggressive, too advanced, and too resistant to conventional therapies. "I've already spent 3 months fighting this with everything modern medicine has to offer," she said. "I've been poked and prodded and filled with chemicals that made me sicker than the disease itself. I've lost my hair, my strength, and 40 pounds. I've missed Emma's school play and Jake's first Little League game because I was too weak to get out of bed." Tom returned to his chair beside the hospital bed. Sarah reached for his weathered hand, her touch surprisingly warm despite her frail appearance. "I want to plan a perfect last week," she said. "I want to take the kids to the ranch one more time. I want to show Emma how to braid Bella's mane and teach Jake how to properly saddle a horse. I want to have one last family dinner where I'm actually present and engaged, not floating in a haze of pain medication." Her plan was detailed and heartbreaking. She wanted to record bedtime stories for the children, create photo albums with handwritten notes explaining family pictures, and write letters for them to open on future birthdays and graduations. She wanted to have honest conversations with Emma and Jake about death in a way that wouldn't traumatize them, helping them understand that sometimes love means letting go. "And then," she said, her voice becoming even quieter, "I want to go to Oregon with David and you, if you'll come. I want to die peacefully, surrounded by the people I love most, while I still know who you are and can tell you how much you mean to me." The weight of her request settled over Tom like a physical thing. She wasn't asking him just to accept her decision, but to be part of it. To support her in taking a step that went against every instinct he had as a father and protector. Over the next several days, Tom struggled with the decision. He spoke with his pastor, who gently reminded him that different faiths had different perspectives on end-of-life choices. He called his brother in Colorado, who listened without judgment and shared his own experience caring for their father during his final illness. Most importantly, Tom spent hours researching Oregon's Death with Dignity Act, understanding the legal requirements and safeguards in place. He learned that patients had to be Oregon residents or establish residency, had to be evaluated by multiple physicians, and had to wait through mandatory waiting periods to ensure the decision wasn't made impulsively. The process wasn't quick or easy, which somehow made it feel more legitimate to Tom. Sarah would have to prove her mental competency, confirm her diagnosis with independent medical opinions, and repeatedly affirm her choice over a period of weeks. These requirements assured him that this wasn't a rash decision made in a moment of despair. But the hardest part came when Sarah asked him to help her explain the situation to Emma and Jake. The children knew their mother was sick, but they didn't understand the finality of her condition. Sarah wanted them to have time to process and ask questions, rather than being blindsided by her death. The conversation with the grandchildren took place at the ranch, in the same living room where Tom had explained death to Sarah when his father passed away 25 years earlier. Emma, mature beyond her 8 years, asked practical questions about who would pack her school lunches and help with homework. Jake, still young enough to believe in magical solutions, suggested that maybe the horses could make Mommy feel better. Sarah handled their questions with remarkable grace, explaining that while her body was very sick and couldn't be fixed, her love for them would never die. She promised that Grandpa Tom would take care of them, that they would still live at the ranch, surrounded by the animals and open spaces they loved, and that she would always be with them in their hearts and memories. The children's acceptance was both heartbreaking and inspiring. They seemed to understand, in the way that children sometimes do, that their mother was trying to protect them from something worse. Emma asked if she could help plan their special week together, while Jake wanted to know if Mommy would be able to watch them from heaven. As the date approached, Tom found himself oscillating between admiration for his daughter's courage and grief over losing her. But one evening, as he watched Sarah reading bedtime stories to the children despite her obvious exhaustion, he finally understood the love behind her choice. She wasn't giving up. She was taking control of the one thing she could still control, ensuring that her final act as a mother would be one of protection rather than prolonged suffering. And she was trusting him, her father, to understand and support the most difficult decision of her life. The last week at the ranch unfolded like a bittersweet dream that Tom knew would replay in his memory for the rest of his life. Sarah had orchestrated every moment with the precision of someone who understood the preciousness of time. Despite her weakening condition, she threw herself into creating perfect memories with an intensity that both inspired and broke Tom's heart. Monday morning began with Sarah teaching Emma how to properly groom Bella. The 8-year-old stood on a wooden stool, carefully brushing the old mare's coat, while Sarah guided her movements. Tom watched from the barn doorway as 3 generations of Henderson women worked together, the morning sunlight streaming through the high windows and illuminating the scene like something from a painting. "See how Bella leans into the brush, Emma? That means she trusts you completely," Sarah explained, her voice weaker than it had been just days before. "Trust is something you earn with animals. Just like with people, you have to be gentle, consistent, and patient." Emma nodded solemnly, absorbing not just the lesson about horse care, but the deeper wisdom her mother was trying to impart. Even at 8, she seemed to understand that these weren't just casual instructions, but important teachings meant to guide her long after her mother was gone. Tuesday was Jake's day for his special riding lesson. Sarah had always been nervous about putting the 6-year-old on horseback alone, but now she seemed determined to give him this gift of confidence and connection with the animals. Tom led the gentlest horse they owned, an old gelding named Charlie, while Sarah walked beside them, offering encouragement. "Hold the reins like you're holding a baby bird, Jake. Firm enough that it won't fly away, but gentle enough that you won't hurt it," she said, her breath coming in shorter bursts, but her voice still filled with maternal warmth. "Horses can feel everything you're feeling. If you're scared, they're scared. If you're calm and confident, they'll take care of you." Jake sat straighter in the saddle, his small chest swelling with pride as Charlie responded to his gentle commands. Tom saw his grandson's face light up with the same joy Sarah had experienced during her first solo ride 30 years earlier. The continuity of that moment, the passing down of tradition and skill, felt like a sacred ritual. Wednesday brought the family photography session Sarah had planned. She had hired a professional photographer from town, but more importantly, she had mapped out specific locations around the ranch that held special meaning. They took pictures by the old oak tree, at the creek where fireflies danced on summer evenings, in front of the barn where 4 generations of Hendersons had worked and laughed and built their lives. But it was the candid moments between posed shots that felt most precious. Sarah lying in the grass with both children, pointing out cloud shapes and telling stories about the adventures they might have beyond the sky. Emma braiding wildflowers into her mother's thin hair, while Jake collected interesting rocks to add to his ever-growing collection. Tom found himself both behind and in front of the camera, documenting these final days while also being present for them. The photographer, a kind woman named Maria, who had known the family for years, worked with remarkable sensitivity, capturing not just images but emotions, relationships, and the ineffable quality of love that permeated even this most difficult time. Thursday was reserved for the recording sessions. Sarah had set up a small studio in her childhood bedroom, using equipment that David had borrowed from a friend who worked in radio. She spent hours reading children's books aloud, recording bedtime stories that Emma and Jake could listen to whenever they missed her voice. Tom listened from the hallway as Sarah's weakened voice brought beloved characters to life with the same dramatic flair she had used when reading to him as a small child. She recorded Goodnight Moon and The Giving Tree, Charlotte's Web, and Where the Wild Things Are. Between stories, she added personal messages, reminding Emma to be brave and kind, encouraging Jake to keep asking questions about everything, telling them both how proud she was to be their mother. The most difficult recording was a series of messages for future milestones. Sarah recorded birthday wishes for the children through their 18th birthdays, graduation congratulations, first day of school encouragements, and even relationship advice for their teenage years. She spoke into the microphone as if she would actually be there for these moments, her voice carrying hope and love across years she wouldn't live to see. Friday evening brought the goodbye dinner, a feast that Sarah had planned down to the last detail. Tom grilled steaks on the outdoor barbecue while Sarah, despite her exhaustion, insisted on making her famous cornbread and the chocolate cake that had been a family tradition for birthday celebrations. David helped in the kitchen, his own grief carefully hidden behind forced cheerfulness for the children's sake. They ate on the back porch as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too beautiful for such a sorrowful occasion. Sarah had enough strength to eat a few bites and to laugh at Jake's silly jokes and Emma's imitation of their school teacher. For those couple of hours, it almost felt like any other family dinner, except for the intensity with which everyone seemed to be memorizing every detail. After the children went to bed, Sarah and Tom sat on the porch swing where she had spent countless evenings as a child, talking about dreams and fears and all the mysteries of growing up. Now, as an adult facing the ultimate mystery, she seemed surprisingly peaceful. "I'm not afraid of dying, Dad," she said quietly, her hand resting in his. "I'm afraid of leaving them, afraid of missing out on watching them become who they're meant to be. But I'm not afraid of what comes after. I keep thinking about Mom, about seeing her again. I keep thinking that maybe death isn't an ending but a different kind of beginning." Tom had no words adequate for such a moment. He simply held his daughter's hand and listened to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling into evening, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind through the cottonwood trees. Saturday morning came too soon. The drive to Oregon felt surreal, like traveling through a landscape that couldn't quite be real. Sarah rode in the passenger seat with a pillow and blanket, dozing fitfully as the miles passed. David followed in a separate car, giving father and daughter this final time alone together. The facility in Portland was nothing like what Tom had imagined. Instead of a clinical hospital setting, it resembled a comfortable home with large windows, soft lighting, and beautiful gardens. The staff treated Sarah not as a patient, but as a person making an autonomous choice about her own life, offering support without judgment. The final hours were both the longest and shortest of Tom's life. Sarah spent time in private conversation with each of them, sharing final thoughts and expressing gratitude for the love they had given her. She spoke with Emma and Jake by video call one last time, telling them she was proud of their bravery and reminding them to help Grandpa take care of the horses. When the time came, Sarah looked directly into Tom's eyes and spoke the words that would echo in his mind forever. "Thank you for letting me choose how this story ends, Dad. Thank you for loving me enough to let me go." The medication worked quickly and peacefully. Sarah simply closed her eyes and stopped breathing, her face relaxing into an expression of profound peace. Tom held her hand until the very last moment, then continued holding it long after she was gone, unwilling to break that final physical connection with his daughter. The drive back to the ranch was the longest journey of Tom's life. He carried with him not just grief, but also a complicated mixture of emotions he was still learning to name. There was profound sadness, of course, but also a deep respect for Sarah's courage and a reluctant admiration for her choice to die with dignity on her own terms. Emma and Jake were waiting for him at the ranch, staying with David's sister until his return. Breaking the news to them was one of the hardest things Tom had ever done, but their reaction surprised him. They grieved, certainly, but they also seemed to understand that their mother had made a choice motivated by love, not by giving up. In the months that followed, Tom learned to navigate single parenthood at an age when most men were thinking about retirement. The ranch became a healing place for all of them, where grief could coexist with daily routines and small joys. Emma found solace in caring for the horses, while Jake discovered a talent for training the barn cats. The recordings Sarah had made became a treasured part of their bedtime ritual. Her voice, preserved in digital files, continued to comfort and guide the children as they adjusted to life without her physical presence. Tom found himself listening to the recordings too sometimes, finding comfort in hearing his daughter's voice offering encouragement for challenges she would never see them face. A year later, Tom understood that Sarah's final choice had been both an ending and a beginning. The ranch continued to thrive under his care and the children's eager assistance. Emma had inherited her mother's natural ability with horses, while Jake showed signs of the mechanical aptitude that had run in the Henderson family for generations. But more than preserving family traditions, Tom realized that Sarah's choice had taught them all something profound about love, courage, and the importance of facing difficult decisions with grace. She had shown them that sometimes the most loving thing a person can do is make a choice that others might not understand, but that comes from a place of deep care for the people left behind. The ranch held new memories now, layered over the old ones like sediment that enriches soil over time. And Tom Henderson, the man who had thought he understood everything about life and death and the responsibilities of love, continued learning from his daughter even after she was gone, understanding finally that sometimes letting go is the most generous act a father can perform.